In the 19th century, Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book that had a deep dimension in the unknown history. He called the book Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, in which he collected many stories of the first men and books of what's after. And he revealed something that myths have been associated with for thousands of years, when he talked about a gathering of people of the first era who built the greatest civilization on Earth and left a mysterious legacy that extended to the second and final era. Three archaeologists wrote that there was a civilization deep in ancient times which was superior in an unknown way. It's most likely a civilization of a lost continent that was built in Egypt and Mesopotamia. And after that civilization perished through many eras, the pharaohs came and inherited those castles and palaces. So they lived in the dwellings of those who wronged themselves and took what didn't belong to them. At the beginning, you should know that what we're doing here is a study and research, not assertion, because only the great creator knows the news of the old generations. After we showed you in the first part the depth of the Nile Valley civilization history and the origin of the first civilization of the early Egyptians, from the foregoing, we find that there's a confusion between two or more successive civilizations on one land due to a lack and obscuring of information. The history of the pharaohs was unknown before the advent of the French campaign, and by translating the hieroglyphic language in 1822, they attached everything to Pharaoh and hid what Napoleon's campaign discovered about the first civilization before the flood. And the question that we ended with was, could it be that the people of Ad were the first Egyptians? It's been historically proven from the book of the Quran and the successive monuments that the people of Ad were mighty people of great height, physique, and urbanization, and they were likened to palm trees because of their height and size. It was explicitly mentioned that Ad and the city of Iram weren't created like them in the world. And Iram was described as the city of the pillars, and a pillar is the tall building that could have a pointed head. This is what we find whether in the pyramids or obelisks, both of which have a pointed head, and there's no equal to their construction in the whole world. One of the verses in the Quran says, "Do you construct on every elevation a landmark for amusing yourselves?" The reason for the revelation of the verse was that the Prophet Hud protested against his people because of abandoning their faith in God, and their preoccupation with building huge buildings that look like mountains at high places just for the sake of bragging. These descriptions apply to the pyramids, as they are huge mountain-like buildings built on a height that is today called the Pyramid Plateau. Here we must show that the pyramids weren't built in one era, but rather over successive eras. Their beginning was before the flood, according to what Al-Mas'udi mentioned, and it extended after it. But they weren't like their predecessors for a highly developed technical purpose, but rather for bragging and absurdity. In view of the manner of their end, we find in the Quran that God destroyed them with a strong wind and none of them remained. And when the Sphinx was discovered, it was covered with sand. From a scientific point of view, erosion factors can't raise the sand to such a high height without the rest of the places, which confirms that strong winds blew on that region, which is the punishment of the people of Ad. As we've shown you previously, the Sphinx is devoid of any writings or inscriptions proving its affiliation to the era of the pharaonic families. Is it possible that the largest and most famous statue in the world was neglected by the pharaohs of engraving on it, and they were the ones who engraved on stones to attribute them to themselves? This clearly proves that the Sphinx was covered with sand during the pharaonic dynasties. Most likely it was a strong wind that carried sand from the valley to the plateau. Today, many geological researchers confirm that the analysis of sediments on the body of the Sphinx indicates the presence of a huge amount of water that caused erosion factors to occur on its body, which indicates that the statue existed in the rainy era of Egypt 20,000 years ago. The foregoing confirms to us that the Sphinx dates back to the era before the pharaohs. That is, to the era of the first Egyptians, and it's the same situation with most of the pyramids, which prompts us to ask again by saying, the pharaohs who carved and decorated all temples and didn't even leave a stone without engraving it and attributing it to their kings. Is it reasonable that they forgot to engrave inside the pyramids the pride of the Egyptian buildings and the whole world? At the beginning of the second millennium, more than 65 incomplete pyramids buried in sand were discovered. So what made their construction suddenly stop, although the pharaonic civilization didn't suddenly disappear from existence? The mystery of the incomplete pyramids buried in sand baffled many researchers, and the only explanation says that the construction stop was due to the disappearance of the builders as a result of a sudden strong wind, which explains their burial under sand before they were completed. When the torment came to the people of Ad, they thought it was rain clouds coming over their valleys, and notice here that it said their valleys when their place is mentioned. Egypt is known as the Nile Valley, which is divided into two branches, and from each branch many valleys are distributed. And it was said about them in another verse, they were so utterly wiped out that nothing could be seen but the ruins of their dwellings. And so God left their dwellings as a lesson and example to those after them. What we believe today to be temples are buildings for them that they used to live in, as we always notice from the height of the columns that it's equal to the height of the people of Ad, and also the height of the windows and the size of the stones they're built of. Those dwellings were taken by the pharaohs after them as their temples. All civilizations' buildings were built of small stones commensurate with the sizes of their people, no matter how huge that civilization was. This is what we find in the Roman, Persian, and Greek civilizations, but the Egyptian one was characterized by huge gates, giant windows, and huge stones, in proportion to the heights of those who inhabited it in the first era. And the pharaohs came and dwelt in the dwellings of the people of Ad, where another verse says about them, "And you dwelt in the dwellings of those who wronged themselves, and it was clear to you how we had dealt with them, and we put forth many parables for you." And after they inhabited them, they built internal walls to suit them, and decorated them with inscriptions and attributed them to their kings. And most of what they did was to repair and rebuild them generation after generation. Just as the early Christians did when they inhabited the temple of Edfu to escape persecution by the Romans. So they erased the pharaonic inscriptions from the walls of the temple because they glorified another religion. All of the above indicates that Ad were the first Egyptians who built the civilization there, but perhaps we'll never know that for sure. We'll now mention a set of evidence also showing that the pharaohs were restorers of the civilization of Egypt and not builders of it. When a wall of giant stones used to demolish, the pharaohs were repairing it with mud and bricks. If they were the real builders of the pyramids or that civilization, then why don't they repair it from the same building components, which are giant stones? Also, the pharaohs made dozens of additions inside the dwellings of the people of Ad, which they used as temples, using bricks, which appears clearly in the giant stone buildings. And the third evidence, why were the 5 pharaonic castles in Sinai built out of mud? Weren't castles supposed to be built in the same style as the civilization they inhabit, of the huge and solid stones, if they were the ones who used those stones? From the foregoing, we find that Ad the First more likely to be the owners of the great technical civilization in the Nile Valley, i.e. the first Egyptians before history. But for research integrity, we must mention the opinion of the other side opposing the hypothesis that they were the first Egyptians, which says that the ancestors of the Egyptians weren't the people of Ad, but rather a great civilization that arose in a time that dates back to before the flood, and some of them say to after it. But it's a time that isn't limited to a few thousand years as they claim, but to tens and tens of thousands of years.